Hi, everyone. My name is Jim DiNoia. Welcome to Building Conversations. I am a project executive with STO Mission Critical. STO Mission Critical is a brand of the STO Building Group that specializes in data center construction. I am here with my colleague Martin O'Neill, SVP of STO Mission Critical, and our distinguished guest, Nick Marzorati, VP of Engineering with Sentinel Data Centers. Today, we're going to just talk about a subject that we are calling. Hi, everyone. My name is Jim DiNoia. Welcome to Building Slingshot reaction of the COVID era. Let's put it that way. For the last few years, and where it's gone, where we are now, and where we may think it's going. Today, we'll bring up some things that we hope that will inspire or be intriguing to the audience, and from an engineering, construction, and owner's perspective. So let's start with that, and we'll have Nick and Martin introduce themselves.
Nick Marzorati, VP Data Center Engineering at Sentinel. I come from a consulting MEP background. I graduated Stevens Tech in 2011. I took a job working consulting engineering for the last 10 or so years, and moved over to the Sentinel role a little over a year ago. So my focus when at the consulting firm was predominantly data center mission critical work. And so that's kind of how I landed at the role at Sentinel Data Centers.
Great. Martin O'Neill, Senior Vice President of STO Mission Critical. Been working in the industry, building data centers for the last 25 years now. I've had the pleasure of working with Sentinel for, I think it's almost 20 years now, building data centers all over the U.S.
Okay. Thanks, guys. Yeah. I think what we'll do is hit our first question. I think, Martin, you're gonna probably start with this one, and then Nick, you can chime in. But the first thing is kind of where we start is, I think it's been talked about the effects of COVID, but since it arrived 3 years ago, we felt the changes and the impacts to the landscape and the mission critical industry. There's been a consistent rise to the effect of projects, conception, and execution. So where would you take that, Martin, and just talk us through the different things that have happened over and what we've experienced?
Yeah, sure. I think you said it too already, Jim. COVID affected all verticals in the construction industry, not just mission critical, right? We became a very social industry to a very virtual industry, both on active projects and prospective projects. What we saw specifically from a mission critical standpoint was just the volume and the size of the projects that were being put out on the street. Historically, data centers, they are large scale, but there was a lot of smaller, medium-sized data centers from a 8 megawatt IT, critical IT load, to the point where now most of the RFPs that we're answering are for 400,000 square feet day one, multiple story, and probably 36 to 40 megawatts day one of critical IT. And that hasn't stopped. It hasn't slowed down. In fact, it's accelerated. We're seeing that from more hyperscalers, but we're also seeing it now in a vast amount from the developer-led model. So that was a big change for us. And I'll say kudos to all of our teams on all of our platforms for being able to deal with that in responding to RFPs, in executing work virtually during COVID, but then post-COVID transitioning back to it. I think one other thing that, we saw as a big change during COVID and post-COVID was the size and the scale of the data centers drove the energy providers, the utilities, to max out in certain areas. So for us, from a geographical standpoint, we were looking at new regions that we had never worked in before, because everyone's seen what happened down in North Virginia, right, with the utility and the transmission and the stress on the transmission lines, and the fact that we can't get that power to the sites anymore in a quick fashion. So people have been looking at different locations, and then also, I think, Nick, you'll agree, the cost of land. I mean, it's gone through the roof. So geographical reach for us has changed dramatically. But again, it's part of what we're doing, part of the industry.
Yeah, I mean, just kind of piggybacking off of the slingshot. When COVID started, right, it was really scary for everybody. There was the kind of everybody worked from home. You almost thought there was going to be kind of a lull, a slowdown. And I think we're calling it the slingshot because we weren't really expecting there to be an influx of all these data center requests, RFPs that are coming through. And so, my hunch is that really it was kind of, data center developers and own, customers and, some of the larger guys, they really wanted to hedge their bets and push each other to kind of get into that next tier of development. So you almost saw this exponential growth through the data center, through the COVID era. But part of the issue was that it was creating a lot of labor shortages because the factories were kind of pulling people out of them. And so, as a result, you kind of have these two compounding things. You've got an intense amount of RFP requests coming in, but then the factories and the fabricators, everybody kind of slowing down a bit to kind of gear up for preparing for the pandemic. And so you kind of ended up in a very interesting time. And then kind of post COVID, it almost feels a bit like we haven't caught up. Production hasn't caught up with the request. There was almost this 1 or 2 year backlog, and now you kind of see that with equipment lead times, right? And you kind of see that with almost everything all the way up, from the supply chain all the way up. And it kind of pushed stress on not even just the build side of it kind of put stress on the design side as well, because, at the time I was at an MEP consulting firm during COVID, and I could say we it was really, really tough to keep our head above water. The requests were just coming in. And so I think that's still happening now. Right. And so I think it's interesting to kind of see how this current state of everybody being overloaded, factories being overloaded, lead times being 2 years out, kind of how everybody starts to adapt to that. And then the kind of traditional project approaches, they all start to change and form around that. But really interesting and exciting to be a part of it and see kind of, see the growth just exponentially just expand.
Yeah, I'm starting to wonder if the slingshot has actually released yet, or if it's still ramping up over for the next 5 years. So.
Yeah.
But okay, moving on to another topic. All of us in the data center business have seen exponential growth in the industry. I think we all agree that the scale has a macro impacts to the supply chains. As we were talking about with your fabricators and stuff. How has it changed the facilities, how they're designed, and what are the major challenges, risks, and strategies from the construction standpoint with regards to
Well, I think Nick touched on a few of those, Jim. Historically, data centers have always had long lead times when it comes to like whole big iron, right? The generators, the UPS, the switch gears, the chillers, all the big kit. And when I say long lead times, I mean like 50 weeks, not 92 weeks, or a year plus right now is normal, or approaching 2 years. But one thing that we did notice, and again, it's not just unique to the data center industry, it's unique to the whole construction industry, but it affects us too. The cost increase in the lead time challenges now started to affect structural studs, structural steel, precast, roofing, stuff that we never had a problem getting became a problem for us. So that was something that we had to start, building into our schedules way in advance. Logistically, how do we build the building with limited materials on hand, right? We've had some clients that, have done a really good job of pre-purchasing a lot of whether it's the exterior skin of the building, right? The precast, the steel, all that good stuff. They've been able to get that ahead of the RFP, ahead of the CM, and then assign it to the CM, so we have it there. I think another big challenge has been cost. So we've got a major issue with schedule, but we've also got a major issue with cost. So when we budget out a project day one, and then 6 months later when the design's finalized, that day one may pencil out for a deal, and then 6 months later that may not pencil out. So the costs have gone crazy. I mean, structural steel went up 45%, right? Not quite 50%, but it almost doubled. Roofing doubled. We're seeing some stabilization in some of those of those materials, but still on the mechanical side, the electrical side. I mean, it's pretty scary being able to obtain those parts and things that we need to execute the work.
Yeah, on the developer side, from a schedule perspective, it's just getting really challenging to plan. So now lead times for equipment. So back in the day, you'd always pre-purchase, like you said, all the the gens and transformers and stuff. And so it almost seems now that the pre-purchase schedule, things have gotten such long lead that we're way off from the traditional project schedule, meaning from customer engagement through landing the deal and kind of in parallel lining up, the equipment showing up. And so what we're seeing it kind of doing is it's kind of putting a pinch on the design side, because you want to be planned for, you kind of want to remove risk on the build sides, but you kind of have to take the risk and procure some of this equipment before the deals come to fruition. And so the way that you manage that, at least from my perspective on the design side, is you kind of start to adapt a more of a prototypical approach where, you kind of have equipment that could be potentially teed up for the new project that's coming, but maybe it's kind of going to work for the project that you've kind of already got in the rear view mirror, if you will. So that kind of prototypical approach, it's weird. It's like all these big supply and demand kind of tug of war situation that's happening. And then I think that changes how the buildings are designed, right? So they're no longer, super niched to a specific client. You kind of start to see a more wide-scale standardization, such that your equipment procurement process can kind of line up with the actual project schedule that has to come about. And then the cost volatility, that's another scary one. I mean, it makes planning and budgeting and all the conversations that you have with your customer much more challenging, because educating your customers on the costs. We all often we're talking 2-3x the cost of what it used to do some of the things. And so your customers are basically, a lot of them balk at it, right? They can't believe it. And, contractor bids coming in and just the mechanical and electrical and stuff like that. And it's, we're kind of in this we're still kind of in this rapid growth period where, where we haven't really got those supply chains worked out. So, a lot of the balls are in the vendor's court, right? They kind of hold all the keys for the lead times and the schedule. And so, we're left trying to cater to that via modifying the designs a bit.
And I think something that you touched on too, Nick, which is really important for us, is that it's the interest in bidding work right now, because with the strain on the trades, on the vendors, not only mission critical healthcare booming as well. What we found is we'll go out to certain regions and really get we'll get interest, but not as much interest as we would get in the past, right? And so I think the best success we've had is where we've been able to partner up with a client, and they've been fully transparent with us on the pipeline. So they'll give us plenty of advance notice on work in different regions, size, scale, all that good stuff, and we're able to forecast that and be transparent with them and say, hey, this is something that we can go do for you, right? But then also socialize that with the right subcontractors and vendors so that they get advance notice to say this job is coming, versus just getting an RFP that hits the street and you've got 4 weeks to respond. Yeah,
for sure. It kind of feels like everything is moving towards a design build. And I know on the opportunities we work on with Structure Tomas, we're engaging you guys almost the minute that we get the RFP, right? We're engaging in constructability discussions and lead time discussions and what's the latest on equipment and pricing and manufacturing. So you almost have to. You almost have to in this climate.
Yeah, we found that all across the board is that the developers want to get the contractors on board as soon as possible, or at least get their feedback as soon as possible to keep going, to get things ahead of schedule. Nick, let's keep you on a roll here to talk about trends, technologies, and where you see things are stand out more than others for changes.
Yeah. I think it's a really expansive question, so it can kind of go, so just starting from when I kind of got into the mission critical industry, call it a little bit more than a decade ago. we were building 1 to 2 to 3 megawatt halls, probably at the largest. And so, and that would be probably for buildings that were more or less going to end up being 10 to 20, I'd say at the tops, megawatts total. And so now, it seems like gone are the days of those smaller halls. It's like if you're going through the process of standing up a shell, standing up and, coordinating with all the utilities, it seems like everybody's pushing into this 5 to 7 to 9 or even 10 megawatt hall sizes. And, I think a lot of customers are kind of sometimes even going above that. And so, that kind of changes the way that the buildings are looking over, the last 5 to 7 years. And so, it's almost a result, like I said, this is why it's called the COVID kind of, slingshot, if you will. But in the fall and the wake of the pandemic, with the massive expansion, everybody wants to build, the biggest and the most scalable, the largest, and they want to really get the most out of the lemon, if you will.
Yeah.
So you see a lot of larger halls, but with that comes kind of people wanting to optimize the building shell themselves, right? And so you're really going towards kind of increasing the density as well. So not only are their halls getting larger, meaning they can support more IT capacity, but they're increasing in density. And so, density is, call it 10 years ago, probably in the 100 to 200 watts a square foot. And now, now you've got a lot of customers that have requirements that are pushing you into the 350 to 400. And, some other customers are in some other projects are really trying to squeeze it down. We can kind of get up to 500 watts square foot, which is I think doable. But I think it starts to push the envelope on some of the technologies. And I think another trend you'll probably start to see, and so the advent of getting those data halls and so dense and so large, it really is kind of it was kind of a perimeter cooling problem to solve for a lot. And I think perimeter cooling is a strategy that we've seen for forever, right? So typical downflow crawl units to a raised floor, but it almost seems now like there's no more raised floors, right? So I don't know about you guys, but not a lot of raised floors are being built. So it's hard to achieve the higher densities and the higher capacities with traditional raised floors. So you're starting to see a lot of fan wall utilization. So I think that the introduction of, the fan wall style cooling really helped get data center halls to the capacities that, you're starting to see today.
Yeah.
So, I think, I could keep going if you like. It kind of depends.
Why don't we have Martin chime in, and then I'll come back. Another question on that for you.
Yeah, I think one of the big trends, we certainly are seeing, in addition to design, but it's all about logistics, right? So we're seeing a lot of developers asking CMs to come on board early to get pad ready, right? So instead of putting the shell up right away, it's get it pad ready, so that, we rub the side out, we get it level, we get it ready, and then that way the developer is able to go and respond to the RFP very quickly versus, on that front end, you probably have 4 to 6 months of work, right, depending on the size and scale of the site. So that's definitely a trend that we're seeing in the industry that we didn't see before. And prefab, right? That's not new. That's been around for a long time. People have been pushing it, but we're doing a lot more with the limitations on labor. We always used to look at it and say, if you can reduce the labor in the field, you increase the safety as well, right? Because you're putting it into a more, not confined, but controlled environment.
Control.
But now we have to, because there are limitations on labor and getting that labor to the available site. So we are seeing a lot more prefab going out there. So skid mounts, whether it's an electrical room, mechanical skid, that's just becoming the norm now for us. So speed to market or speed to build or speed to deployment is almost, it feels like it's the only way to meet the demand. And it can only really happen through technological advances. And so I think another big one that we're starting to see a lot of in water constrained environments, you're starting to see, I think you're seeing a lot more air cooled chillers that are primarily cooling the data centers. And so, I think a few years ago, the technology was still kind of, pretty inefficient, and people were struggling to get an air cooled chiller to work with the latest energy codes and those kind of compliance paths. But now, the introduction of the Danfoss turbo core compressor within air cooled chillers is kind of changing a little bit of the landscape of how data centers are coming about. And I think it used to be how
how some people used to do it in the past. Traditionally Sentinel, we've always loved to build water cooled plants, and if we have an abundance of water, we'll always build water cooled plants. We find them to be the most effective, best capex and opex gain for your buck. So, but the advent of those new chiller technology is really helping speed to market developers.
So can you just add for my own question here is, if you can bring in extra power out as much as you want, the complication now going forward is the heat rejection, right? That's really your main problem going forward.
Yeah. So I guess if you're asking if we have unlimited power and no water,
Correct.
Now the problem to solve is, so I think then you kind of get into some, you kind of get into some nice relationships between, like a multi-story. That's another thing we didn't really talk about a lot, but a lot of these data centers that are going now are multi-story, right?
Yeah.
It used to be like that, right? So, there would be those that were popping up back in the day, but now it almost seems like the standard. And I will get back to that point in a sec. But the reason why they're going multi-story is because they're trying to get the best bang for the land, right? And so, but what ends up happening is, you've got to kind of find a spot for the heat rejection, and so as you go vertical, you're losing area to reject that heat. So every project's a little bit unique still, but you have to find that balance between how tall can your building go, how dense can you get, versus what you can fit on the roof practically, right? So that it's not a super niched solution into something that pushes you away from the speed to market deployment. So a lot of variables at play to try to solve that problem, which is all part of the exciting delivery.
So that might need its own podcast. Who knows?
Potentially.
Yeah.
Potentially.
True.
Next week.
Yep, there you go.
So let's go on to our fourth question here. Have you seen others apply or working towards more sustainable solutions? I could say either you guys can raise your hand and pick out whoever wants to start this one.
I'll do a little bit at the front, and then I'll hand it over to the technician over here who can go into real detail. But certainly from a sustainability standpoint, one of the big things we've seen, certainly as a challenge, right, is power generation on site, is having diesel backup generators on site in the quantity that they are now. Back not even 5, 6, 7 years ago, right, it was unheard of to have 60, 70 generators supporting one facility. Not only the environment, the impact to the environment or the local neighborhoods as well, right? Mm-hmm. From a noise and a visual standpoint. So what we've seen is a lot of people now looking at eliminating diesel generators and UPS in totality, right? And going to a fuel cell type of approach, whether it's a Bloom Energy or someone similar to that. So to me, that's a big sustainability thing. What's the Achilles heel of a data center, right? It's lack of power and water, really, right? It's
on the sustainability. It's definitely a consideration for every new build that goes in, but it's kind of starting. Yeah, I guess it just feels like with the size and the densities of the halls being, the buildings kind of going up, there's not yet a renewable energy source that can practically meet the demand of a data center. And so, rather than considering, potentially offloading, some of the utility power to some sort of a renewable source, which is really tough to do at the 40 to 60 to 80 megawatt, campus. From Sentinel's end, we look to achieve the lowest possible PUE. And so that for us comes from a couple different ways. And so it's the advent of evaporative cooling. We use a lot of evaporative cooling, but we typically couple that with, and much of the industry is getting there as well, with much warmer temperatures in the halls. So the warmer that you can deliver air to the racks, obviously the less mechanical cooling that you have to be. And so, depending on certain geographies, you could potentially deliver, almost the outside air entirely for the entire year. And so, obviously there's limitations to some of that, and there's issues that have to get worked out. But from the overall sustainability play, we've considered the Bloom Energy, and I think it's a great technology if the gas is kind of available. Right. And I think that for us, the sustainability play is reducing our annualized PUE to absolute bare minimum, as close to 1 as possible. And so, we've got a couple active facilities that, have our water cooled buildings that are boasting annualized PUEs less than 1.1 on an annual basis, which is, in my mind, as sustainable as it gets, right?
Yeah.
Outside of generating your own utility power, right?
And I mean, there's been a lot of discussion over the last 12, 24 months about nuclear power, right? So how does that play into this industry, if it ever will play in this industry?
Yeah.
The standalone, plants that would support those campus builds. Because again, campus builds weren't the norm back in the day. Now everyone that's building or developing is putting up more than one shell.
Mm-hmm.
It's normally 4 shells at a minimum, and it could be as much as 9 or more total, right? There was probably a handful or less of folks in the industry that were doing those campus builds.
Yeah.
Now it's a norm,
Yeah, I mean, the nuclear power, you're getting into, this is kind of there's the macro planning for the expansion of data centers, starting from the early 2000s to now. And so, how are local utility companies, scaling up to meet that? And, we see certain areas are highly constrained, right? Your Northern Virginia utilities are, extremely constrained. You start to see a lot of those pockets of constrained areas. And so, it's definitely a challenge. I do, nuclear, we might be a ways away depending on how certain developers get there. But I think, I'm sure utility companies are starting to plan for this massive expansion and considering, building that into their overall pipeline, new plants, new generation plants.
Yep.
As their grids start to tap out.
Yeah, that's for sure. To get a last topic so far for this podcast, I think would be the future. How do we predict the future? Like what?
Can you give me some lottery numbers, Jim?
What kind of advancements do you see happening because of the new chip design? And you see the NVIDIA stuff that's come out seems like every week now. There's something new or an advancement, or their stock is just exploding. But what effect does that have on Sentinel and
Yeah, I mean the future planning is like it's a good nerd out topic, right? The AI. The AI certainly seems to be the hottest thing right now. And so, at least from my perspective, we're trying to understand what that means for a lot of our customers. And so, we have some theories about this basically bolstering their current global production capacity increases. But this AI bug might be basically the new parallel path that a lot of these customers take. And so, we're kind of at an inflection point where you might just start to see all the big players start to double everywhere, right? Just doubling and continue to exponentially double. And so, how do you plan for that, right? While also trying to, meet the speed to market and the supply and demands, those big swaths of supply and demand, issues. So I think that's the hardest question to ask and answer is really how do you plan for that? And so for us, it's all about just, acquiring land in relatively economic areas where we can, that aren't as constrained from a utility power perspective, but also, we're working on kind of prototyping and understanding, pushing the limits on densification and things like that. But, it seems right now the most practical method for heat rejection is still water. There are certainly some customers that are pushing the bounds, but for us, it seems like water as the main medium for heat rejection is the move. So, I think it's the closer you can get that water directly to the racks, the best we will be in the future for planning. And so, we'll still be likely employing a water-based cooling rejection method for a while as a response to meeting the unknown, but probably known exponential growth of the industry. So,
yeah.
Have you seen much, Nick, in terms of to go into a little bit more on your question, Jim, like emerging cooling, right? I mean, we've heard everything. We've seen responses that we have to put together and build out now up to 600 watts a square foot. But then we've heard, what could be coming in the future is, in 1 megawatt racks. And so do you see that? I mean, do you see that near term on a grander scale? I know it's happening on a micro scale at this point, I would say, but do you see that happening across the industry as land becomes more expensive, if water becomes less available?
Yeah, submersive cooling. So I think direct to chip things, things that I think it's definitely coming. Very expansive topic as well. I think that's, I guess like the kind of the cop out answer I'll give right now is the best way that we're planning for that is bringing water as close to the halls as possible as a philosophical way of the heat rejection, right? So, we feel that if we do that, then we're prepared for much. And if we kind of reserve some portion of our land to expansions and cooling plants, then I think that we can kind of get there.
Yeah. No, I definitely agree. It's a very it's a loaded question, right?
Yeah.
Because I mean, everyone's touching that topic in the industry.
You start to toe the line with what's practical again, and now you're at the speed to everything is a trade off, and then you start to toe the line between what speed to market going to look like for something like that, right? So,
and I think one from what we've seen, certainly in the last 6 months or so, is challenges with, again, power generation, right? Backup generation. So I think part of the future will be generatorless data centers. Now can, as you just said, bring in, gas to the site to be able to do that. But I think that's definitely something that's going to push the envelope on a lot of developments.
I think we're going to go through a period of try this, try that, try this, until we kind of find an avenue between the balance of how much power we can get and how efficient you can still get the PUEs and everything else down to where the most efficient data centers really will be at the cream of the crop.
Yeah.
And I think we'll end it there for today.
And then everybody steals that design.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Nick, thank you for being part of the
my
podcast.
Pleasure.
We appreciate all the time you put in for us. Martin,
Absolutely.
Of course, thank you for participating here. And
thanks for heading up, Jim.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I appreciate STO support here and obviously Sentinel Data Centers. So thanks a lot, everybody, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks.